Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-minute lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 4.12, President Eisenhower's Cold War, Part 2. It includes information that aligns with the third section on your Unit 4 study guide. Remember, you have control over the lecture, so pause whenever you need, write down information that you need, use your study guide to help you figure that out. Make sure you write down any questions you have or mark those on the study guide, and rewatch if you need to. Let's go ahead and get started. In the last set of notes, we looked at the big ideas behind President Eisenhower's Cold War policies, that brinkmanship and massive retaliation, as well as how he continued to implement containment during his presidency. Today we want to look at other events that occurred during Eisenhower's years in office. First, let's talk about Sputnik. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first satellite, named Sputnik, into orbit. Sputnik could not actually do anything besides transmit a radio signal back to the world, but it was the first step to launching a missile between continents, because if you could get a satellite there, you could eventually be able to control a missile and get it between continents, or an intercontinental ballistic missile. This meant that if the USSR was able to develop the technology first, they could potentially destroy the US with a nuclear missile without ever leaving Europe or Asia. That really began the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. America felt that they could not let the Soviets get ahead in any technological areas, especially in the space race. So science and math became very important. The U.S. created NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958 in order to compete with the Soviet Union in their space program. This continued into Kennedy's presidency in the 60s, and he even expanded it. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about Kennedy. Also under Eisenhower, the U.S. faced a Middle Eastern issue known as the Suez Crisis. This crisis centered on the Suez Canal, which had been built by Britain and France, but had been seized by Egyptian troops in 1956. So it's in Egypt, had been built by Europeans, but the Egyptians took control in 56. So while that doesn't necessarily seem connected to the Cold War, the Egyptian government and troops were actually backed by the Soviet Union on this action, which was a threat to Britain and France. So Britain and France attacked Egypt for control of the canal, and here you can kind of see some of what happened. The Soviets then threatened to bomb Britain and France. So we're looking at potential European war. So the U.S. prepared for a nuclear attack based on those ideas of brinkmanship and massive retaliation, but they really didn't want to. So going to the brink of war, we were getting ready. We were ready for that massive retaliation, but we did manage to persuade Britain and France to back down from their invasion of Egypt and let Egypt control their canal. This actually paved the way for other Middle Eastern nations to accept Soviet support in the future, and that's going to actually lead to more issues later on in that area of the world. Eisenhower was also known to use covert operations, like spying, to further American interests and policies in the Cold War. Now, most presidents have done this, but in 1960, an American U-2 spy plane was actually shot down over the Soviet Union. So the U.S. denied any knowledge of the spy plane, claiming it was a weather instrument. We didn't do that. We wouldn't spy on you. We wouldn't send planes there. However, the pilot was captured alive. And even though he was supposed to commit suicide with a capsule, he didn't. So that proved the U.S. had sent the plane to spy on the Soviets. That actually led to more distrust between the U.S. and Soviet leadership. So we already had issues, but now the Soviets had proof we had lied to them. So it's going to create more distrust. And that is the U-2 incident. It's going to really hurt relations between the two countries, and it's all over that U-2 spy plane. In addition to the many forceful actions taken by Eisenhower, he also used peaceful means to support the U.S. in the Cold War. One example of this was in 1959, both Alaska and Hawaii were added to the U.S. as states. This created a buffer zone between the U.S. and communist countries because they're both there on our west coast, outside of the U.S. They're not part of the continental states. It also meant that the U.S. could add more military presence there without alarming other countries because now they're part of our country. Those were strategic additions to the U.S. So Eisenhower was proud of many of his actions and his ability to avoid war while containing communism. He feared he had not created a lasting peace, however, and that we were not even close to a real peace with the Soviet Union. And he was definitely correct in that, as we will see when we look at Kennedy's presidency in the next set of notes. This is the end of U.S. Notes 4.12. Bring any questions you have to class. I'll see you then.